I've never had a client pull out a mortgage calculator, not once. In 6 years of selling Gulf Coast real estate, not a single investor has sat across from me and punched numbers into a calculator. And that tells you everything, because the investors who are actually building wealth on the Gulf Coast already know the mortgage payment is not the real number. It is one piece of a much bigger picture, and it might be the least important piece. I learned that the hard way in my own life. For years, doctors were looking at one symptom at a time instead of stepping back and seeing the whole picture. Because of that, it took years before anyone could put it all together and give me the diagnosis I actually needed. It was a terminal diagnosis. When nobody is connecting the dots, you don't get answers. You just keep spinning. That is exactly what happens when an investor looks at a mortgage payment and thinks they have the full story. You cannot make a sound decision on incomplete information. Today, I'm going to show you the full picture. The 3 numbers that actually determine whether a Gulf Coast property works, none of which are the interest rate. By the end of this, you'll know how to analyze a beach investment the way local experts do, and you'll never look at a mortgage calculator the same way again. The wait for lower rates trap. Let's start here because this is the question I get more than almost any other, and I want to give you the most honest answer. Waiting for rates to drop is a strategy, but it's a riskier one than most people realize. When the rates drop, demand surges. Every buyer who has been sitting on the sidelines comes back into the market at the exact same time. So competition increases, and on the Gulf Coast where inventory is already limited, prices always respond accordingly. The buyer who waited for a better rate often ends up paying significantly more for the same property, competing with multiple offers, while the buyer who purchased with honest numbers at current rates locked in a better price and negotiated from a position of strength. There's also the refinance reality I always walk my clients through. If you buy now and the rates drop, you can refinance and capture the benefit. You cannot go back in time and buy at today's price once the market heats back up. The clients who have done the best are the ones who bought when the numbers worked, not when the rate environment felt perfect. Waiting is neutral. It has a cost. It just doesn't show up on a calculator. So if the interest rate isn't the number that makes or breaks a Gulf Coast deal, what is? Let me show you the framework I use with every single investor I work with. When I sit down with an investor before we write an offer, I go to the same 3 numbers every time, and none of them are the interest rate. Number 1, what it actually costs to own, not just the mortgage payment, the real ownership costs, insurance, HOA fees, and management costs combined. That's the number that tells you what you're actually committed to every single month before a single guest ever books a stay. Number 2, what the building is hiding. The monthly HOA fee shows up right in the MLS listing, but what the listing doesn't tell you is whether the building's reserve fund is healthy or whether there's a deferred maintenance quietly building toward a special assessment. Roofs, HVAC systems, structural maintenance on a coastal building. If the reserve fund is depleted or underfunded, you could be looking at a huge assessment on top of your monthly fees. That's the numbers most investors never think to ask about until it's too late. Number 3, what the property actually earns, not peak season performance projections, annual reality. The Gulf Coast has a strong season, a shoulder season, and an off season, and you want to have an understanding how all 3 work to get an honest picture of what a property will actually produce. When you see the rental income advertised in a listing or a projection, it's almost always based on the best weeks of the year. That is not the number you build your investment around. When you stop obsessing over the interest rate and start running these 3 numbers honestly, you see the investment the way it actually is, not the way you hope it will be. The insurance surprise. Now, here's the one that surprises investors most. And for once, it's actually good news. If you're buying a beach condo, your personal insurance situation is much more manageable than most people expect. In a condo, you carry what's called an HO6 policy. That covers your contents and a portion of loss of rental income. The building structure itself, the roof, exterior walls, common areas, that's all covered under the Condo Association's master policy. So your personal HO6 is significantly more affordable than most people anticipate when they first start thinking about beach property insurance. Now, if you're buying a beach house rather than a condo, that equation changes completely. You are responsible for insuring the entire structure yourself. And coastal insurance on the Gulf Coast for a standalone home is going to be considerably higher. That distinction actually makes the condo investment case quite compelling from an insurance standpoint. But the one thing you always need to verify is that the Condo Association's master policy is adequate. If there are gaps in that coverage, the risk falls back on you. That's a conversation to have before you make an offer, not after you close. Before you make an offer on a Gulf Coast property, let's sit down and look at the full picture together. I don't want you to be one of the investors who gets surprised after they close. I want you to go in with the complete confidence, knowing exactly what you're getting into and exactly why it works. That's what I do for every single client. If you're serious about buying in Orange Beach, Gulf Shores, or anywhere on the Gulf Coast, the link is in the description. Let's make sure you're making a decision you'll love. How the real analysis actually works. Let me show you exactly how this plays out in practice, because this is the moment where everything becomes clear. I was working with a client on a condo that looked really solid on the surface. A great location, strong rental history advertised, reasonable HOA fee. An investor using a basic mortgage calculator would have seen a manageable payment, added the HOA, and thought it was a workable deal. But when we pulled the full picture together, the actual HO6 cost, the master policy situation, the true state of the reserve fund from the condo documents, the management fee, the honest rental income projections across all 3 seasons, the property that looked like it worked on paper was actually underwater once we ran the real numbers. The rental income being advertised as a projection was based on peak performance, not the annual reality. That's the moment where everything becomes clear, when you stop looking at the mortgage payment in isolation and start looking at the complete investment picture. In this case, we kept looking and found a property that actually worked beautifully. And that's the process. The properties that perform well have HOA fees that are reasonable, reserve funds that are genuinely healthy, insurance that's manageable, and rental histories that hold up across all 3 seasons. The properties that struggle almost always have a weakness in one of those areas. When an investor comes to me with strong feelings about a property that has a weakness somewhere, my job is to show them the full picture, clearly and kindly. Sometimes that means suggesting a different management company, because a different company might be managing a unit in the same building with the same footprint and getting significantly better results. The goal is never to talk someone out of a purchase they love. It's to make sure there are no surprises after they close. Investment decision versus vacation purchase. Here's the trap I see most often, and it happens before anyone runs a single number. Investors who fall in love with a property before they've looked at a single number. They tour the unit, stand on the balcony, picture their family there, and at that point, the analysis can start to become about justifying the purchase rather than honestly evaluating it. My process is to run the full analysis before we ever schedule a showing. I want the numbers to qualify the property first. If the property pencils out as a strong investment, going to see it in person is exciting because you already know it works. That's a completely different experience than touring something beautiful and hoping the numbers cooperate afterwards. The question I always ask clients to hold in their mind is this: would this property still be worth owning if you never got to stay in it yourself? If it stands on its own as an investment, we keep moving with full confidence. If it only makes sense because of how much you personally love it, that's a vacation purchase rather than an investment decision. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just need to know which one you're making before you write the offer. I have plenty of clients doing both, using it as a vacation home and letting it offset the cost. That works. It works beautifully. There's nothing wrong with that either. You just need to go in honest about what you're buying. The Gulf Coast is still one of the most compelling markets in the country for beach property investment when you know what to look for and how to analyze it correctly. The right property at the right price with the right numbers behind it is still out there. And if you find what you want and the numbers work, don't wait for the rate to drop. That's exactly what we figure out together. Is this the right time? Is this the right property? If the answer is yes, we're not gonna wait, we're gonna go for it. Before you go, I want to say something about waiting. A lot of people tell themselves they're waiting for the perfect rate, the perfect property, the perfect timing. But most of the time, what they're really waiting for is certainty, and certainty never comes. It comes from one of the hardest moments of my life. And if any part of you is still holding back, not because the numbers don't work, but because something deeper is keeping you on the sidelines, go watch the next video. I'll link it right here, and I'll see you there.